I'm going to try doing things a little differently this week, and I'm going to embed the close read in the ebook so that we can utilize the audio feature. I want you to pause, read the background and about the authors, and then come back and we'll move forward from there. After the Nazis found the Franks' hiding place, the family was sent to the Auschwitz concentration camp in Poland. At the camp, the men and women were separated, and Mr. Frank never saw his wife and daughters again. Anne and her sister were eventually transferred to another concentration camp, Bergen-Belsen. After the war, Mr. Frank returned to Amsterdam and discovered Anne's diary, which had been found and saved by a friend. The diary, originally published in Dutch in 1947, has now been printed in many other languages, allowing millions of people around the world to read Anne's words. A drama or a play is a form of literature meant to be performed by actors for an audience. The author of a play is called a playwright, and the text of a play is called a script. What did the playwrights use as the source of information for their script? They based their script on Anne Frank's diary entries. Why is it important for readers to know how the playwrights used Anne's diary? Pause and think about that. It's important to remember that the play is based on Anne's diary, but it is not an exact account of what happened.
The Diary of Anne Frank. Drama by Frances Goodrich and Albert Hackett.
The script of a play includes a cast of characters, a list of all the characters in the play. Sometimes this list may include additional information about some or all of the characters. Review the cast of characters at the beginning of the play. How many families are living in the secret annex? Who are the members of each family? Pause while you check that out. There are two families. Anne, Margot, Mr. Frank, and Mrs. Frank are members of the Frank family. The Van Don family is made up of Peter, Mr. Van Don, and Mrs. Van Don. In addition to a cast of characters, a script also includes stage directions. Stage directions are instructions that give readers, actors, the director, and the stage crew important details that explain what's happening in the play. Stage directions are often in italic type. They include information about the setting, the time, and place the events occur.
The time, July 1942 to August 1944, November 1945. The place, Amsterdam, the Netherlands. The scene remains the same throughout the play. It is the top floor of a warehouse and office building in Amsterdam, Holland. The sharply peaked roof of the building is outlined against a sea of other rooftops, stretching away into the distance. Nearby is the belfry of a church tower, the Westertoren, whose carillon rings out the hours. Occasionally, faint sounds float up from below. The voices of children playing in the street, the tramp of marching feet, a boat whistle from the canal. The 3 rooms of the top floor and a small attic space above are exposed to our view. The largest of the rooms is in the center, with 2 small rooms slightly raised on either side. On the right is a bathroom, out of sight. A narrow, steep flight of stairs at the back leads up to the attic. The rooms are sparsely furnished, with a few chairs, cots, a table or 2. The windows are painted over, or covered with makeshift blackout curtains. In the main room, there is a sink, a gas ring for cooking, and a wood-burning stove for warmth. The room on the left is hardly more than a closet. There is a skylight in the sloping ceiling. Directly under this room is a small, steep stairwell, with steps leading down to a door. This is the only entrance from the building below. When the door is opened, we see that it has been concealed on the outer side by a bookcase attached to it.
Why do you think the stage directions include a description of the sounds outside the annex? Pause while you think. Because the residents can't go outside, the sounds they hear are very important. They remind readers that these sounds are one of the few sources of information the residents have about the outside world. The church bells tell the time. The marching feet are a constant reminder that German soldiers are close by. The structure of a literary work is the way in which it is arranged or organized. The script of a play is often divided into sections. An act is a major section in a play, similar to a chapter in a book. An act may be divided into smaller sections, called scenes.
Act 1, Scene 1. The curtain rises on an empty stage. It is late afternoon, November 1945. The rooms are dusty, the curtains in rags. Chairs and tables are overturned. The door at the foot of the small stairwell swings open. Mr. Frank comes up the steps into view. He is a gentle, cultured European in his middle years. There is still a trace of a German accent in his speech. He stands, looking slowly around, making a supreme effort at self-control. He is weak, ill. His clothes are threadbare. After a second, he drops his rucksack on the couch and moves slowly about. He opens the door to one of the smaller rooms and then abruptly closes it again, turning away. He goes to the window at the back, looking off at the Westertoren as its carillon strikes the hour of 6. Then he moves restlessly on.
Stage directions include different kinds of information, such as details about scenery, lighting, sound effects, and ways for actors to move and speak. Reread lines 1 through 25 to identify the different types of information found in these stage directions. What does the audience see on stage when the curtain rises? Pause while you think. They see empty rooms that are dusty, the curtains are tattered, the chairs and tables are turned over. What kinds of information do the stage directions give about Mr. Frank? The directions tell Mr. Frank's age and manner. They explain how he looks, sounds, feels, and moves. What does the description suggest about Mr. Frank? He has been through a very difficult ordeal.
From the street below, we hear the sound of a barrel organ and children's voices at play. There is a many-colored scarf hanging from a nail. Mr. Frank takes it, putting it around his neck. As he starts back for his rucksack, his eye is caught by something lying on the floor. It is a woman's white glove. He holds it in his hand, and suddenly, all of his self-control is gone. He breaks down, crying. We hear footsteps on the stairs. Miep Gies comes up, looking for Mr. Frank. Miep is a Dutch girl of about 22. She wears a coat and hat, ready to go home. She is pregnant. Her attitude toward Mr. Frank is protective, compassionate.
Are you all right, Mr. Frank?
Yes, Miep, yes.
Everyone in the office has gone home. It's after 6. Don't stay up here, Mr. Frank. What's the use of torturing yourself like this?
I've come to say goodbye. I'm leaving here, Miep.
What do you mean? Where are you going? Where?
I don't know yet. I haven't decided.
Mr. Frank, you can't leave here. This is your home. Amsterdam is your home. Your business is here, waiting for you. You're needed here. Now that the war is over, there are things that...
I can't stay in Amsterdam, Miep. It has too many memories for me. Everywhere there's something. The house we lived in, the school, that street organ playing out there. I'm not the person you used to know, Meep. I'm a bitter old man. Forgive me. I shouldn't speak to you like this. After all you did for us, the suffering...
No. No. It wasn't suffering. You can't say we suffered.
I know what you went through, you and Mr. Crawler. I'll remember it as long as I live. Come, Meep. He starts for the steps, then remembers his rucksack, going back to get it.
Mr. Frank, did you see? There are some of your papers here. We found them in a heap of rubbish on the floor after you left.
Burn them. He opens his rucksack to put the glove in it.
But, Mr. Frank, there are letters, notes.
Burn them. All of them.
One way authors reveal what characters are like is through their actions. Reread lines 26 through 37 to identify Mr. Frank's thoughts and feelings. How does the white glove affect Mr. Frank? Pause while you think. All his self-control is gone. He breaks down crying. What does this detail reveal about him? The glove probably belonged to someone he loved. He is caring and sensitive. Stage directions in a script provide important information about how to perform a play. These directions are sometimes set off in parentheses to separate them from the words characters say. Identify the various stage directions in lines 91 through 103. What do these directions say that Meep does? She gets a bundle of papers from a cupboard and gives it to Mr. Frank. What do the directions indicate that Mr. Frank does? He puts the white glove he found into his rucksack. Why is it important to know that Mr. Frank saves the glove but wants the papers to be burned? The glove represents a part of his former life that still is meaningful to him. He thinks the papers do not.
Burn this?
She hands him a paper-bound notebook. Anne's diary. Monday, the 6th of July, 1942. 1942? Is it possible, Meep? Only 3 years ago. Dear Diary, since you and I are going to be great friends, I will start by telling you about myself. My name is Anne Frank. I am 13 years old. I was born in Germany the 12th of June, 1929. As my family is Jewish, we emigrated to Holland when Hitler came to power.
My father started a business importing spice and herbs. Things went well for us until 1940. Then the war came, and the Dutch capitulation, followed by the arrival of the Germans. Then things got very bad for the Jews. You could not do this, and you could not do that. They forced father out of his business. We had to wear yellow stars. I had to turn in my bike. I couldn't go to a Dutch school anymore. I couldn't go to the movies, or ride in an automobile, or even on a streetcar, and a million other things. But somehow we children still managed to have fun. Yesterday, father told me we were going into hiding. Where, he wouldn't say. At 5 o'clock this morning, Mother woke me and told me to hurry and get dressed. I was to put on as many clothes as I could. It would look too suspicious if we walked along carrying suitcases. It wasn't until we were on our way that I learned where we were going. Our hiding place was to be upstairs in the building where Father used to have his business. 3 other people were coming in with us, the Van Dons and their son Peter. Father knew the Van Dons, but we had never met them.
Scene 2. It is early morning, July 1942. The rooms are bare, as before, but they are now clean and orderly. Mr. Van Daan, a tall, portly man in his late 40s, is in the main room, pacing up and down, nervously smoking a cigarette.
The script of a play always indicates which character or characters are speaking. Reread lines 124 through 138. What shift takes place in who is speaking? Pause while you find that. First, Mr. Frank, then Anne's voice joins him, and then only Anne's voice. What is the impact of this shift? How does it affect the tone or feeling of the scene? Pause while you think. The playwrights are emphasizing that there is a shift in time, moving from the present to the past. The tone changes from one of sadness when Mr. Frank speaks to a more hopeful one as Anne speaks.
His clothes and overcoat are expensive and well cut. Mrs. Van Daan sits on the couch, clutching her possessions, a hatbox, bags, etc. She is a pretty woman in her early 40s. She wears a fur coat over her other clothes. Peter Van Daan is standing at the window of the room on the right, looking down at the street below. He is a shy, awkward boy of 16. He wears a cap, a raincoat, and long Dutch trousers, like +4s. At his feet is a black case, a carrier for his cat. The yellow Star of David is conspicuous on all of their clothes.
Something's happened to them. I know it.
Now, Curly.
Mr. Frank said they'd be here at 7 o'clock. He said...
They have 2 miles to walk. You can't expect...
They've been picked up. That's what's happened. They've been taken.
Mr. Van Daan indicates that he hears someone coming. You see? Peter takes up his carrier and his school bag, etc., and goes into the main room as Mr. Frank comes up the stairwell from below. Mr. Frank looks much younger now. His movements are brisk, his manner confident. He wears an overcoat and carries his hat and a small cardboard box. He crosses to the Van Daans, shaking hands with each of them. Mrs. Van Daan, Mr. Van Daan, Peter. There were too many of the green police on the streets. We had to take the long way around. Up the steps come Margot Frank, Mrs. Frank, Miep, not pregnant now, and Mr. Crawler. All of them carry bags, packages, and so forth. The Star of David is conspicuous on all of the Franks' clothing. Margot is 18, beautiful, quiet, shy. Mrs. Frank is a young mother, gently bred, reserved. She, like Mr. Frank, has a slight German accent. Mr. Crawler is a Dutchman, dependable, kindly. As Mr. Crawler and Miep go upstage to put down their parcels, Mrs. Frank turns back to call Anne.
Anne?
Anne comes running up the stairs. She is 13, quick in her movements, interested in everything, mercurial in her emotions. She wears a cape, long wool socks, and carries a school bag. My wife, Edith, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan. Their son, Peter, my daughters, Margot and Anne.
Another way an audience gets to know and understand characters is through the descriptions of their physical appearance. Reread lines 180 through 193, paying attention to the physical appearance of Mrs. Van Daan and her son Peter. What does Mrs. Van Daan look like? Pause while you find that. She is a pretty woman in her early 40s and wears a fur coat. She is clutching her possessions. How does Peter Van Daan look? He is 16. He's a shy, awkward boy, and he has a cat carrier. What do these details reveal about Mrs. Van Daan and about Peter? Pause while you think about that. Because Mrs. Van Daan is clutching her belongings, they are probably very important to her. As a boy who is shy and awkward, Peter may have difficulty living with the Frank family because he has never met them. Dialogue is the written conversation between 2 or more characters. The format for dialogue in a play is the name of a character followed by the words he or she speaks. Reread lines 196 through 207. What two characters are having a dialogue here? Mrs. Von Don and Mr. Von Don. What do the ellipses in the dialogue indicate? The ellipses show where there is a break or pause in the dialogue as the characters interrupt one another. What does the dialogue reveal about Mrs. Von Don? She is nervous and excited. She's afraid that the Franks have been arrested by the Nazis.
Anne gives a polite little curtsy as she shakes Mr. Van Don's hand. Then she immediately starts off on a tour of investigation of her new home, going upstairs to the attic room. Miep and Mr. Crawler are putting the various things they have brought on the shelves. "I'm sorry there is still so much confusion."
"Please, don't think of it. After all, we'll have plenty of leisure to arrange everything ourselves."
We put the stores of food you sent in here. Your drugs are here. Soap, linen here. Thank you, Miep. I made up the beds, the way Mr. Frank and Mr. Crawler said. Forgive me, I have to hurry. I've got to go to the other side of town to get some ration books for you. Ration books? If they see our names on ration books, they'll know we're here.
"There isn't anything—"
Don't worry, your names won't be on them. I'll be up later.
"Thank you, Miep."
It's illegal then, the ration books? We've never done anything illegal.
"We won't be living here exactly according to regulations." As Mr. Crawler reassures Mrs. Frank, he takes various small things, such as matches, soap, etc., from his pockets, handing them to her. "This isn't the black market, Mrs. Frank. This is what we call the white market, helping all of the hundreds and hundreds who are hiding out in Amsterdam." The carillon is heard playing the quarter hour before 8. Mr. Crawler looks at his watch. Anne stops at the window as she comes down the stairs.
It's the Westertoren.
"I must go. I must be out of here and downstairs in the office before the workmen get here. Miep or I, or both of us, will be up each day to bring you food and news and find out what your needs are. Tomorrow I'll get you a better bolt for the door at the foot of the stairs. It needs a bolt that you can throw yourself and open only at our signal. Oh, you'll tell them about the noise?" "I'll tell them."
Examine lines 291 through 306. Why is Mrs. Frank concerned about the legality of the ration books? Pause while you think. She has always been law-abiding. Even though she's being treated so unfairly, she wants to remain honest. What is the impact of Mr. Crawler's distinction between the black market and the white market? His contrast suggests that the black market is a bad thing, while implying that what he is doing, although technically illegal, is good and moral.
"Goodbye, then, for the moment. I'll come up again after the workmen leave. Goodbye, Mr. Crawler."
How can we thank you?
"I never thought I'd live to see the day when a man like Mr. Frank would have to go into hiding. When you think—"
He breaks off, going out. Mr. Frank follows him down the steps, bolting the door after him. In the interval before he returns, Peter goes over to Margot, shaking hands with her. As Mr. Frank comes back up the steps, Mrs. Frank questions him anxiously.
What did he mean about the noise?
"First, let us take off some of these clothes." They all start to take off garment after garment. On each of their coats, sweaters, blouses, suits, dresses, is another yellow Star of David. Mr. and Mrs. Frank are underdressed quite simply. The others wear several things: sweaters, extra dresses, bathrobes, aprons, nightgowns, etc. "It's a wonder we weren't arrested, walking along the streets. Petronella with a fur coat in July, and that cat of Peter's crying all the way." as she is removing a pair of panties.
A cat? On, please. It's all right. I've got on 3 more.
She pulls off 2 more. Finally, as they have all removed their surplus clothes, they look to Mr. Frank, waiting for him to speak. Now, about the noise. While the men are in the building below, we must have complete quiet. Every sound can be heard down there, not only in the workrooms, but in the offices too. The men come at about 8:30 and leave at about 5:30. So, to be perfectly safe, from 8 in the morning until 6 in the evening, we must move only when it is necessary, and then in stockinged feet. We must not speak above a whisper. We must not run any water. We cannot use the sink or even, forgive me, the WC. The pipes go down through the workrooms. It would be heard. No trash. Mr. Frank stops abruptly as he hears the sound of marching feet from the street below. Everyone is motionless, paralyzed with fear. Mr. Frank goes quietly into the room on the right to look down out of the window. Anne runs after him, peering out with him. The tramping feet pass without stopping. The tension is relieved. Mr. Frank, followed by Anne, returns to the main room and resumes his instructions to the group. No trash must ever be thrown out which might reveal that someone is living up here. Not even a potato paring.
Another way that an audience gets to know and understand a character is through the reactions of the other characters in the play. Reread lines 334 through 337. What does this comment by Mr. Crawler reveal about Mr. Frank? Pause while you think. Mr. Frank is highly respected by the others.
We must burn everything in the stove at night. This is the way we must live until it is over, if we are to survive.
Until it is over.
After 6, we can move about. We can talk and laugh and have our supper and read and play games, just as we would at home. And now I think it would be wise if we all went to our rooms and were settled before 8 o'clock. Mrs. Van Daan, you and your husband will be upstairs. I regret that there's no place up there for Peter, but he will be here, near us. This will be our common room, where we'll meet to talk and eat and read, like one family. And where do you and Mrs. Frank sleep? This room is also our bedroom.
That isn't right. We'll sleep here and you take the
It's
room
your
upstairs.
place. Please, I've thought this out for weeks. It's the best arrangement. The only arrangement.
Never, never can we thank you. I don't know what would have happened to us if it hadn't been for Mr. Frank.
You don't know how your husband helped me when I came to this country, knowing no one, not able to speak the language. I can never repay him for that. May I help you with your things? No, no. Come along, Leafia.
You'll be all right, Peter? You're not afraid?
Please, Mother. They start up the stairs to the attic room above. Mr. Frank turns to Mrs. Frank. You, too, must have some rest, Edith. You didn't close your eyes last night. Nor you, Margot.
I slept, Father. Wasn't that funny? I knew it was the last night in my own bed, and yet I slept soundly.
I'm glad, Anne. Now you'll be able to help me straighten things in here. Come with me. You and Margot rest in this room for the time being. He picks up their clothes, starting for the room on the right.
You're sure? I could help. And Anne hasn't had her milk.
I'll give it to her. Anne, Peter, it's best that you take off your shoes now, before you forget.
Reread the dialogue in lines 453 to 456. Why does Mrs. Van Daan think Peter might be afraid? Pause while you think. His parents will be sleeping in an upstairs room away from him. Peter will be sleeping in a room below with the Franks, a family he doesn't know. What does Peter mean when he says, "Please, Mother"? He means, "Don't embarrass me, Mother. I'm not a little boy. I'll be fine."
He leads the way to the room, followed by Margot.
You're sure you're not tired, Anne? I feel fine. I'm going to help Father. Peter, I'm glad you are to be with us.
Yes, Mrs. Frank. Mrs. Frank goes to join Mr. Frank and Margot. During the following scene, Mr. Frank helps Margot and Mrs. Frank to hang up their clothes. Then he persuades them both to lie down and rest. The Van Daans in their room above settle themselves. In the main room, Anne and Peter remove their shoes. Peter takes his cat out of the carrier.
What's your cat's name?
Mushy?
Mushy, Mushy, Mushy! I love cats. I have one, a darling little cat. But they made me leave her behind. I left some food and a note for the neighbors to take care of her. I'm going to miss her terribly. What is yours, a him or a her?
He's a Tom. He doesn't like strangers. He takes the cat from her, putting it back in its carrier.
Then I'll have to stop being a stranger, won't I? Is he fixed?
Huh?
Did you have him fixed?
No.
Oh, you ought to have him fixed, to keep him from, fighting. Where did you go to school?
Jewish secondary?
But that's where Margot and I go. I never saw you around.
I used to see you, sometimes.
You did?
In the schoolyard. You were always in the middle of a bunch of kids. He takes a penknife from his pocket.
Why didn't you ever come over?
I'm sort of a lone wolf. He starts to rip off his Star of David.
What are you doing?
Taking it off.
But you can't do that. They'll arrest you if you go out without your star.
He tosses his knife on the table. Who's going out?
Why, of course. You're right. Of course we don't need them anymore.
She picks up his knife and starts to take her star off.
I wonder what our friends will think when we don't show up today.
Remember that stage directions provide important information about how a scene in a play should be performed. Reread lines 498 through 516, paying attention to the stage directions. What do the stage directions indicate about how the performers should interact with Peter's cat? Pause while you check that out. Peter takes his cat out of the carrier and picks up the cat and walks away with it. Then Peter takes the cat from her and puts it back in the carrier. What do these directions reveal about Peter? Seems like he's pretty possessive about his cat. When authors draw a contrast, they identify the differences in two or more subjects. Reread lines 530 through 540. What does Peter mean when he says that he is a lone wolf? He is someone who prefers to act or be alone. What contrast do the playwrights reveal between Anne and Peter in this passage? While Anne is very social and enjoys being with others, Peter prefers to be alone.
I didn't have any dates with anyone.
Oh, I did. I had a date with Yopi to go and play ping pong at her house. Do you know Yopi Duvall?
No.
Yopi's my best friend. I wonder what she'll think when she telephones and there's no answer. Probably she'll go over to the house. I wonder what she'll think. We left everything as if we'd suddenly been called away. Breakfast dishes in the sink, beds not made.
As she pulls off her star, the cloth underneath shows clearly the color and form of the star.
Look, it's still there.
Peter goes over to the stove with his star.
What are you going to do with yours?
Burn it. She starts to throw hers in and cannot.
It's funny. I can't throw mine away. I don't know why.
You can't throw something they branded you with? That they made you wear so they could spit on you?
I know. But after all, it is the Star of David, isn't it?
In the bedroom right, Margot and Mrs. Frank are lying down. Mr. Frank starts quietly out. Maybe it's different for a girl. Mr. Frank comes into the main room. Forgive me, Peter. Now, let me see. We must find a bed for your cat. I'm glad you brought your cat. Anne was feeling so badly about hers. Getting a used small washtub. Here we are. Will it be comfortable in that? Thanks. And here is your room. But I warn you, Peter, you can't grow any more, not an inch, or you'll have to sleep with your feet out of the skylight. Are you hungry? No. We have some bread and butter. No, thank you. You can have it for luncheon then. And tonight we will have a real supper. Our first supper together. Thanks. He goes into his room. During the following scene, he arranges his possessions in his new room. That's a nice boy, Peter.
He's awfully shy, isn't he?
You like him, I know.
I certainly hope so, since he's the only boy I'm likely to see for months and months.
Mr. Frank sits down, taking off his shoes. Annela, there's a box there. Will you open it? He indicates a carton on the couch. Anne brings it to the center table. In the street below, there is the sound of children playing.
You know the way I'm going to think of it here? I'm going to think of it as a boarding house. A very peculiar summer boarding house, like the one that we...
She breaks off as she pulls out some photographs.
Father! My movie stars! I was wondering where they were. I was looking for them this morning. And Queen Wilhelmina! How wonderful!
There's something more. Go on. Look further. He goes over to the sink, pouring a glass of milk from a thermos bottle. Pulling out a pasteboard-bound book.
A diary!
She throws her arms around her father.
I've never had a diary, and I've always longed for one.
She looks around the room.
Pencil, 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 pencil.
She starts down the stairs.
I'm going down to the office to get a pencil.
Anne, no! He goes after her, catching her by the arm and pulling her back.
But there's no one in the building now.
It doesn't matter. I don't want you ever to go beyond that door.
Never? Not even at night time when everyone is gone? Or on Sundays? Can't I go down to listen to the radio?
Never. I'm sorry, Annika. It isn't safe. No, you must never go beyond that door. For the first time, Anne realizes what going into hiding means.
I see.
It'll be hard, I know. But always remember this, Annika. There are no walls, there are no bolts, no locks that anyone can put on your mind. Meep will bring us books. We will read history, poetry, mythology. He gives her the glass of milk. Here's your milk. With his arm about her, they go over to the couch, sitting down side by side. As a matter of fact, between us, Anne, being here has certain advantages for you. For instance, you remember the battle you had with your mother the other day on the subject of overshoes? You said you'd rather die than wear overshoes, but in the end you had to wear them? Well, now, you see, for as long as we are here, you will never have to wear overshoes. Isn't that good? And the coat that you inherited from Margot, you won't have to wear that anymore.
Remember that a character's actions can reveal something about what the character is like. Examine lines 631 to 656 to discover more about Mr. Frank's nature. What surprises does Mr. Frank have for Anne? Pause while you think. He gives her a box that contains her treasured pictures of movie stars as well as a photo of the Queen of the Netherlands. He also gives her a diary. What can you infer about Mr. Frank from this part of the script? Pause while you think. He is an understanding father who wants his daughter to thrive in a difficult situation. Mr. Frank may already be aware that Anne is a talented writer, but he also wants his energetic daughter to have something meaningful to do while in hiding.
And the piano. You won't have to practice on the piano. I tell you, this is going to be a fine life for you.
Anne's panic is gone. Peter appears in the doorway of his room with a saucer in his hand. He is carrying his cat.
I thought I'd better get some water for Mushi before...
Of course. As he starts toward the sink, the carillon begins to chime the hour of 8. He tiptoes to the window at the back and looks down at the street below. He turns to Peter, indicating in pantomime that it is too late. Peter starts back for his room. He steps on a creaking board. The three of them are frozen for a minute, in fear. As Peter starts away again, Anne tiptoes over to him and pours some of the milk from her glass into the saucer for the cat. Peter squats on the floor, putting the milk before the cat. Mr. Frank gives Anne his fountain pen, and then goes into the room at the right. For a second, Anne watches the cat. Then she goes over to the center table and opens her diary. In the room at the right, Mrs. Frank has sat up quickly at the sound of the carillon. Mr. Frank comes in and sits down beside her on the settee, his arm comfortingly around her. Upstairs, in the attic room, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan have hung their clothes in the closet and are now seated on the iron bed. Mrs. Van Daan leans back, exhausted. Mr. Van Daan fans her with a newspaper. Anne starts to write in her diary. The lights dim out. The curtain falls. In the darkness, Anne's voice comes to us again, faintly at first, and then with growing strength.
I expect I should be describing what it feels like to go into hiding, but I really don't know yet myself. I only know it's funny never to be able to go outdoors, never to breathe fresh air, never to run and shout and jump. It's the silence in the nights that frightens me most. Every time I hear a creak in the house, or a step on the street outside, I'm sure they're coming for us. The days aren't so bad. At least we know that Meep and Mr. Crawler are down there below us in the office. Our protectors, we call them. I asked Father what would happen to them if the Nazis found out they were hiding us. Pim said that they would suffer the same fate that we would. Imagine! They know this, and yet when they come up here, they're always cheerful and gay, as if there were nothing in the world to bother them. Friday, the 21st of August, 1942. Today, I'm going to tell you our general news. Mother is unbearable. She insists on treating me like a baby, which I loathe.
Notice the various kinds of cues in the script and what they signal to actors, the director, and the stage crew. Reread lines 748 through 759. What instructions do the stage directions give about lighting? The lights gradually dim to complete darkness. What happens to the stage curtain? What does this signal? The curtain falls, comes down. This signals that a scene is ending. Why does the beginning of line 753 say Anne's voice instead of just Anne? Anne is no longer on the stage. The audience hears only her voice speaking the words she is writing in her diary.
Otherwise, things are going better. The weather is...
As Anne's voice is fading out, the curtain rises on the scene. Scene 3. It is a little after 6 o'clock in the evening, 2 months later. Margot is in the bedroom at the right, studying. Mr. Van Daan is lying down in the attic room above. The rest of the family is in the main room. Anne and Peter sit opposite each other at the center table where they have been doing their lessons. Mrs. Frank is on the couch. Mrs. Van Daan is seated with her fur coat, on which she has been sewing, in her lap. None of them are wearing their shoes. Their eyes are on Mr. Frank, waiting for him to give them the signal which will release them from their day-long quiet. Mr. Frank, his shoes in his hand, stands looking down out of the window at the back, watching to be sure that all of the workmen have left the building below. After a few seconds of motionless silence, Mr. Frank turns from the window. "It's safe now. The last workman has left." There is an immediate stir of relief.
Whee! On! I'm first for the WC.
She hurries off to the bathroom. Mrs. Frank puts on her shoes and starts up to the sink to prepare supper. Anne sneaks Peter's shoes from under the table and hides them behind her back. Mr. Frank goes into Margot's room. 6 o'clock. School's over. Margot gets up, stretching. Mr. Frank sits down to put on his shoes. In the main room, Peter tries to find his. "Have you seen my shoes?"
Your shoes?
"You've taken them, haven't you?"
I don't know what you're talking about.
Oh, you're going to be sorry.
Am I?
Peter goes after her. Anne, with his shoes in her hand, runs from him, dodging behind her mother.
Anne, dear.
"Wait till I get you."
I'm waiting.
Peter makes a lunge for her. They both fall to the floor. Peter pins her down, wrestling with her to get the shoes.
Don't! Peter, stop it! Ouch! Anne! Peter!
Suddenly, Peter becomes self-conscious. He grabs his shoes roughly and starts for his room.
Peter, where are you going? Come dance with me.
"I tell you, I don't know how.
I'll teach you.
I'm going to give Mushy his dinner.
Can I watch?
He doesn't like people around while he eats."
Peter, please.
"No!" He goes into his room. Anne slams his door after him.
Anne, dear, I think you shouldn't play like that with Peter. It's not dignified. Who cares if it's dignified? I don't want to be dignified.
Mr. Frank and Margot come from the room on the right. Margot goes to help her mother. Mr. Frank starts for the center table to correct Margot's school papers.
You complain that I don't treat you like a grown-up, but when I do, you resent it. I only want some fun, someone to laugh and clown with. After you've sat still all day and hardly moved, you've got to have some fun. I don't know what's the matter with that boy.
He isn't used to girls. Give him a little time.
Time? Isn't 2 months time? I could cry. Come on, Margot, dance with me. Come on, please. I have to help with supper. You know we're going to forget how to dance. When we get out, we won't remember a thing.
She starts to sing and dance by herself. Mr. Frank takes her in his arms, waltzing with her. Mrs. Van Daan comes in from the bathroom.
Next? Where's Peter? Where would he be? He hasn't finished his lessons, has he? His father'll kill him if he catches him in there with that cat and his work not done.
Mr. Frank and Anne finish their dance. They bow to each other with extravagant formality.
Anne, get him out of there, will you? Peter? Peter!
Opening the door a crack.
What is it?
Your mother says to come out.
I'm giving Mushi his dinner.
You know what your father says.
She sits on the couch, sewing on the lining of her fur coat. Oh, for heaven's sake, I haven't even looked at him since lunch.
I'm just telling you, that's all. I'll feed him.
I don't want you in there.
Peter!
Then give him his dinner and come right out, you hear?
He comes back to the table. Anne shuts the door of Peter's room after her and disappears behind the curtain covering his closet.
Now is that any way to talk to your little girlfriend?
Mother, for heaven's sake, will you please stop saying that?
Look at him blush. Look at him.
Please, I'm not... Anyway, let me alone, will you?
He acts like it was something to be ashamed of. It's nothing to be ashamed of, to have a little girlfriend.
Hyperbole is a figure of speech in which the truth is exaggerated for emphasis or humorous effect. Reread lines 907 through 917. What does Anne mean when she responds to Mrs. Von Don by saying, "Where would he be?" She's implying that Peter is always in the same place, his room, with his cat. Which expression used by Mrs. Von Don is hyperbole? His father'll kill him. His dad's not really going to kill him. What does this expression reveal about Mr. Von Don? Although Mr. Von Don wouldn't really kill his son, Mrs. Von Don is emphasizing how upset her husband will be.
You're crazy. She's only 13.
So what? And you're 16. Just perfect. Your father's 10 years older than I am. I warn you, Mr. Frank, if this war lasts much longer, we're going to be related, and then...
Mazel tov.
I wonder where Meep is. She's usually so prompt.
Suddenly, everything else is forgotten as they hear the sound of an automobile coming to a screeching stop in the street below. They are tense, motionless in their terror. The car starts away. A wave of relief sweeps over them. They pick up their occupations again. Anne flings open the door of Peter's room, making a dramatic entrance. She is dressed in Peter's clothes. Peter looks at her in fury. The others are amused.
Good evening, everyone. Forgive me if I don't stay. I have a friend waiting for me in there. My friend Tom. Tomcat. Some people say that we look alike, but Tom has the most beautiful whiskers, and I have only a little fuzz. I am hoping, in time...
All right, Mrs. Quack Quack.
Peter!
I heard about you. How you talked so much in class they called you Mrs. Quack Quack. How Mr. Smitter made you write a composition. Quack Quack, said Mrs. Quack Quack.
Well, go on. Tell them the rest. How it was so good he read it out loud to the class, and then read it to all his other classes.
Quack, 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 quack. Anne pulls off the coat and trousers.
You are the most intolerable, insufferable boy I've ever met.
She throws the clothes down the stairwell. Peter goes down after them. Quack, quack, quack.
That's right, Annika. Give it to him. With all the boys in the world, why I had to get locked up with one like you.
Quack, quack, quack. And from now on, stay out of my room. As Peter passes her, Anne puts out her foot, tripping him. He picks himself up and goes on into his room.
Anne, dear, your hair. You're warm. Are you feeling all right? Please, Mother.
She goes over to the center table, slipping into her shoes.
Remember that one way to learn about characters is through their actions. And you can also determine what characters are like by what the other characters say, as well as by direct comments playwrights make in the stage directions. Reread lines 976 through 933 to draw conclusions about Anne and Peter. What direct comments by the playwrights show Peter's and Anne's thoughts and feelings? Pause while you think. Peter responds in fury when Anne appears wearing his clothes. Anne is outraged when Peter calls her Mrs. Quack Quack. What conclusions can you draw about Anne and Peter based on their actions, speech, and the comments by the playwrights? Pause while you think. Anne is high-spirited and willing to tease someone for the sake of amusement. Peter's more withdrawn. They both show a lack of sensitivity to the other's feelings.
You haven't fever, have you? No. You know we can't call a doctor here, ever. There's only one thing to do. Watch carefully. Prevent an illness before it comes. Let me see your tongue. Mother, this is perfectly absurd. Anne, dear, don't be such a baby. Let me see your tongue.
As Anne refuses, Mrs. Frank appeals to Mr. Frank.
Otto?
You hear your mother, Anne. Anne flicks out her tongue for a second, then turns away.
Come on, open up.
As Anne opens her mouth very wide.
You seem all right, but perhaps an aspirin. For heaven's sake, don't give that child any pills. I waited for 15 minutes this morning for her to come out of the WC. I was washing my hair.
I think there's nothing the matter with our Anne that a ride on her bike or a visit with her friend Jopie Duval wouldn't cure. Isn't that so, Anne?
Mr. Van Daan comes down into the room. From outside, we hear faint sounds of bombers going over and a burst of ack-ack.
Meep not come yet?
The workman just left, a little while ago.
What's for dinner tonight?
Beans.
Oh, not again.
Poor Pooty. I know, but what can we do? That's all that Meep brought us.
Mr. Van Daan starts to pace, his hands behind his back. Anne follows behind him, imitating him.
We are now in what is known as the bean cycle. Beans boiled, beans on casserole, beans with strings, beans without strings.
Peter has come out of his room. He slides into his place at the table, becoming immediately absorbed in his studies. I saw you in there playing with your cat.
He just went in for a second, putting his coat away. He's been out here all the time doing his lessons.
Anne, you got an excellent in your history paper today, and very good in Latin.
How about algebra?
I'll have to make a confession. Up until now, I've managed to stay ahead of you in algebra. Today, you caught up with me.
We'll leave it to Margot to correct.
Isn't algebra vile, Pim?
Vile.
How did I do? Excellent, 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 excellent.
You should have used the subjunctive here.
Should I? I thought, look here, I didn't use it here.
The two become absorbed in the papers.
Mrs. Van Daan, may I try on your coat? No, Anne. It's all right, but careful with it.
Anne puts it on and struts with it.
My father gave me that the year before he died. He always bought the best that money could buy. Mrs. Van Daan, did you have a lot of boyfriends before you were married? Anne, that's a personal question. It's not courteous to ask personal questions. Oh, I don't mind. Our house was always swarming with boys. When I was a girl, we had...
Oh, God! Not again!
Shut up! One summer we had a big house in Hilversum. The boys came buzzing round like bees around a jam pot. And when I was 16, we were wearing our skirts very short those days, and I had good-looking legs.
She pulls up her skirt, going to Mr. Frank.
I still have 'em. I may not be as pretty as I used to be, but I still have my legs. How about it, Mr. Frank?
All right, we see them.
I'm not asking you. I'm asking Mr. Frank.
Mother, for heaven's sake.
Oh, I embarrass you, do I? Well, I just hope the girl you marry has as good. My father used to worry about me, with so many boys hanging round. He told me, if any of them gets fresh, you say to him, Remember, Mr. So-and-so, remember, I'm a lady. Remember, Mr. So-and-so, remember, I'm a lady.
She gives Mrs. Van Daan her coat. Look at you, talking that way in front of her. Don't you know she puts it all down in that diary?
So if she does, I'm only telling the truth.
Even brief exchanges can reveal or reinforce a reader's ideas about characters. Reread lines 1110 through 1111 to identify Pim. Pim is a nickname Anne uses for her father. How does the word vile impact their exchange? Anne's use emphasizes her tendency to over-dramatize. Mr. Frank's use suggests that he wants to humor her or help her realize how silly she sounds. What do the stage directions in lines 1145 through 1147 imply about the story that Mrs. Van Daan is about to tell? Mr. Van Daan has heard the story so many times that he can repeat it word for word.
Anne stretches out, putting her ear to the floor, listening to what is going on below. The sound of the bombers fades away.
Would you mind, Peter, if I moved you over to the couch? Meep must have the radio on.
Peter picks up his papers, going over to the couch beside Mrs. Van Daan. Haven't you finished yet? No. You ought to be ashamed of yourself. All right. I'm a dunce. I'm a hopeless case. Why do I go on?
You're not hopeless. Don't talk that way. It's just that you haven't anyone to help you like the girls have. Maybe you could help him, Mr. Frank?
I'm sure that his father... Not me. I can't do anything with him. He won't listen to me. You go ahead, if you want. What about it, Peter? Shall we make our school co-educational? Kissing Mr. Frank.
You're an angel, Mr. Frank. An angel. I don't know why I didn't meet you before I met that one there. Here, sit down, Mr. Frank.
She forces him down on the couch beside Peter.
Now, Peter, you listen to Mr. Frank.
It might be better for us to go into Peter's room. Peter jumps up eagerly, leading the way.
That's right. You go in there, Peter. You listen to Mr. Frank. Mr. Frank is a highly educated man.
As Mr. Frank is about to follow Peter into his room, Mrs. Frank stops him and wipes the lipstick from his lips. Then she closes the door after them.
Shh! I can hear a man's voice talking.
Isn't it bad enough here without your sprawling all over the place?
If you didn't smoke so much, you wouldn't be so bad-tempered.
Am I smoking? Do you see me smoking?
Don't tell me you've used up all those cigarettes.
One package. Meep only brought me one package.
It's a filthy habit anyway. It's a good time to break yourself.
Oh, stop it, please.
Playwrights use both dialogue and stage directions to help actors and audiences understand the relationships between the characters. Reread lines 1203 to 1237 to identify Mrs. Van Daan's attitudes toward her husband and Mr. Frank. What are her thoughts about Mr. Van Daan? What are her thoughts about Mr. Frank? Pause while you think. Mrs. Van Daan is critical of her husband, but has great respect and admiration for Mr. Frank. Give evidence from the text. Mrs. Van Daan says Peter doesn't have anyone to help him as the girls do. She kisses Mr. Frank and calls him an angel. She implies that she would have preferred to marry Mr. Frank and calls her husband that one there instead of using his name. She refers to Mr. Frank as a highly educated man.
You're smoking up all our money. You know that, don't you?
Will you shut up? During this, Mrs. Frank and Margot have studiously kept their eyes down. But Anne, seated on the floor, has been following the discussion interestedly. Mr. Van Daan turns to see her staring up at him. And what are you staring at?
I never heard grown-ups quarrel before. I thought only children quarreled.
This isn't a quarrel. It's a discussion. And I never heard children so rude before.
Rude!
Yes.
Ann, will you get me my knitting?
Ann goes to get it.
I must remember when Meep comes to ask her to bring me some more wool. I need some hairpins and some soap. I made a list.
She goes into her bedroom to get the list.
Have you some library books for Meep when she comes? It's a wonder that Meep has a life of her own the way we make her run errands for us. Please, Meep, get me some starch. Please take my hair out and have it cut. Tell me all the latest news, Meep.
She goes over, kneeling on the couch beside Mrs. Van Daan.
Did you know she was engaged? His name is Dirk, and Meep's afraid the Nazis will ship him off to Germany to work in one of their war plants. That's what they're doing with some of the young Dutchmen. They pick them up off the streets.
Don't you ever get tired of talking? Suppose you try keeping still for 5 minutes. Just 5 minutes.
He starts to pace again. Again, Ann follows him, mimicking him. Mrs. Frank jumps up and takes her by the arm up to the sink and gives her a glass of milk.
Come here, Ann. It's time for your glass of milk.
Talk, talk, talk. I never heard such a child. Where is my... Every evening it's the same. Talk, talk, talk. Where is my...
What are you looking for?
My pipe. Have you seen my pipe?
What good's a pipe? You haven't got any tobacco.
At least I'll have something to hold in my mouth.
Opening Margot's bedroom door.
Margot, have you seen my pipe?
It was on the table last night.
Ann puts her glass of milk on the table and picks up his pipe, hiding it behind her back.
Words with a similar denotation or dictionary definition can have very different connotations, the feelings or ideas associated with the word. Words can have positive, neutral, or negative connotation. Reread lines 1268 through 1273. How are the connotations of the words discussion and quarrel different? Pause while you think. Although both words are about people talking together, quarrel has a negative connotation because it includes the idea of anger. Discussion has a neutral connotation. Why is the distinction between the words important to Mr. Van Daan? It seems like maybe he doesn't want to be viewed as a child.
I know. Ann, did you see my pipe? Ann!
Ann, Mr. Van Daan is speaking to you. Am I allowed to talk now?
Oh, you're the most aggravating... The trouble with you is, you've been spoiled. What you need is a good old-fashioned spanking.
Remember, Mr. So-and-so. Remember, I'm a lady.
She thrusts the pipe into his mouth, then picks up her glass of milk.
Oh, why aren't you nice and quiet like your sister Margot? Why do you have to show off all the time? Let me give you a little advice, young lady. Men don't like that kind of thing in a girl. You know that? A man likes a girl who'll listen to him once in a while. A domestic girl who'll keep her house shining for her husband, who loves to cook and sew and...
I'd cut my throat first. I'd open my veins. I'm going to be remarkable. I'm going to Paris.
Paris?
To study music and art.
Yeah.
I'm going to be a famous dancer or singer or something wonderful.
She makes a wide gesture, spilling the glass of milk on the fur coat in Mrs. Van Daan's lap. Margot rushes quickly over with a towel. Ann tries to brush the milk off with her skirt.
Now look what you've done, you clumsy little fool! My beautiful fur coat my father gave me. I'm so sorry. What do you care? It isn't yours. So go on, ruin it. Do you know what that coat cost? Do you? And now look at it. Look at it. I'm very, very sorry. I could kill you for this. I could just kill you.
Mrs. Van Daan goes up the stairs, clutching the coat. Mr. Van Daan starts after her.
Petronella, Leafia, come back! The supper! Come back!
Anne, you must not behave in that way. It was an accident. Anyone can have an accident. I don't mean that. I mean the answering back. You must not answer back. They are our guests. We must always show the greatest courtesy to them. We're all living under terrible tension.
She stops as Margot indicates that Van Daan can hear. When he is gone, she continues.
That's why we must control ourselves. You don't hear Margot getting into arguments with them, do you?
We can learn something about what characters in a play are like by examining the words they say. Reread lines 1349 through 1370 to draw conclusions about Mr. Van Daan and Anne. How does Mr. Van Daan think women and girls should behave? Pause while you think. He thinks they should be quiet, focusing their attention on keeping their house shining for their husbands, and to cook and sew. What do Mr. Van Daan's words reveal about him? He's old-fashioned, narrow-minded, and condescending. What does Anne's response reveal about her? She is idealistic, independent, and wants to have her own career. She's ambitious and expects to do something remarkable and wonderful with her life.
Watch Margot. She's always courteous with them, never familiar. She keeps her distance, and they respect her for it. Try to be like Margot. And have them walk all over me the way they do her? No thanks. I'm not afraid that anyone is going to walk all over you, Anne. I'm afraid for other people, that you'll walk on them. I don't know what happens to you, Anne. You are wild, self-willed. If I had ever talked to my mother as you talk to me. Things have changed. People aren't like that anymore. Yes, Mother, no, Mother, anything you say, Mother. I've got to fight things out for myself, make something of myself. It isn't necessary to fight to do it. Margot doesn't fight, and isn't she? Margot! Margot, that's all I hear from everyone. How wonderful Margot is. Why aren't you like Margot? Oh, come on, Anne. Don't be so. Everything she does is right, and everything I do is wrong. I'm the goat around here. You're all against me. And you worst of all.
She rushes off into her room and throws herself down on the settee, stifling her sobs. Mrs. Frank sighs and starts toward the stove.
Let's put the soup on the stove, if there's anyone who cares to eat. Margot, will you take the bread out?
Margot gets the bread from the cupboard.
I don't know how we can go on living this way. I can't say a word to Anne. She flies at me. You know, Anne, in half an hour she'll be out here, laughing and joking. And...
She makes a motion upwards, indicating the Van Daans.
I told your father it wouldn't work. But no, he had to ask them, he said. He owed it to him, he said. Well, he knows now that I was right. These quarrels, this bickering. Shush, shush.
The buzzer for the door sounds. Mrs. Frank gasps, startled.
Every time I hear that sound, my heart stops.
Starting for Peter's door.
It's Miep.
She knocks at the door.
Father?
Mr. Frank comes quickly from Peter's room. Thank you, Margot. As he goes down the steps to open the outer door. Has everyone his list?
I'll get my books.
Giving her mother a list.
Here's your list.
An idiom is an expression that has a meaning different from the meaning of its individual words. Reread lines 1414 through 1432. Anne doesn't want the Van Daans to walk all over her. What variation of the idiom does Mrs. Frank use in her response to Anne? Pause while you think. She doesn't want Anne to walk on others. What does the idiom walk all over or walk on mean? It means to treat someone badly or in a disrespectful way. to be overbearing. What is the impact of the use of the idiom on readers' understanding of the characters? Anne is confident enough to stand up for herself. Mrs. Frank understands this quality in her daughter, but wishes she would temper it.
Margot goes into her and Anne's bedroom on the right. Anne sits up, hiding her tears, as Margot comes in.
Meep's here.
Margot picks up her books and goes back. Anne hurries over to the mirror, smoothing her hair. "Is it Meep?"
Yes. Father's gone down to let her in.
"At last! I'll have some cigarettes."
I can't tell you how unhappy I am about Mrs. Von Don's coat. Anne should never have touched it.
"Oh, she'll be all right."
Is there anything I can do?
"Don't worry." He turns to meet Meep. But it is not Meep who comes up the steps. It is Mr. Crawler, followed by Mr. Frank. Their faces are grave. Anne comes from the bedroom. Peter comes from his room.
Mr. Crawler!
"How are you, Mr. Crawler?"
This is a surprise. When Mr. Crawler comes, the sun begins to shine.
"Meep is coming?" "Not tonight." Crawler goes to Margot and Mrs. Frank and Anne, shaking hands with them.
Wouldn't you like a cup of coffee? Or, better still, will you have supper with us?
"Mr. Crawler has something to talk over with us. Something has happened," he says, "which demands an immediate decision."
What is it?
Mr. Crawler sits down on the couch. As he talks, he takes bread, cabbages, milk, etc. from his briefcase, giving them to Margot and Anne to put away. "Usually, when I come up here, I try to bring you some bit of good news. What's the use of telling you the bad news when there's nothing that you can do about it? But today something has happened. Dirk, Meep's Dirk, you know, came to me just now. He tells me that he has a Jewish friend living near him, a dentist. He says he's in trouble. He begged me, could I do anything for this man? Could I find him a hiding place? So I've come to you. I know it's a terrible thing to ask of you, living as you are, but would you take him in with you?" "Of course we will." "It'll be just for a night or two, until I find some other place. This happened so suddenly that I didn't know where to turn."
Stage directions often explain what characters' facial expressions should be during particular scenes in a drama. Read the stage directions in lines 1509 through 1514. What word do the playwrights use to explain how Mr. Frank and Mr. Crawler should look? Pause while you find that. The word they use is grave. What does the description signal to the audience? That something distressing has happened.
"Where is he?" "Downstairs in the office." "Good. Bring him up." "His name is Dussel, Jan Dussel." "Dussel? I think I know him. I'll get him." He goes quickly down the steps and out. Mr. Frank suddenly becomes conscious of the others. "Oh, forgive me. I spoke without consulting you. But I knew you'd feel as I do." "Oh, there's no reason for you to consult anyone. This is your place. You have a right to do exactly as you please. The only thing I feel, there's so little food as it is, and to take in another person—" Peter turns away, ashamed of his father. "We can stretch the food a little. It's only for a few days." "You want to make a bet?"
I think it's fine to have him. But, Otto, where are you going to put him? Where?
"He can have my bed. I can sleep on the floor. I wouldn't mind." "That's good of you, Peter, but your room's too small, even for you."
I have a much better idea. I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Margot can take Peter's room, and Peter can go in our room with Mr. Dussel. That's right. We could do that.
"No, Margot. You mustn't sleep in that room, neither you nor Anne. Mooshie has caught some rats in there. Peter's brave. He doesn't mind.
Then how about this? I'll come in here with you and Mother, and Mr. Doosel can have my bed. No, no, no! Margot will come in here with us, and he can have her bed. It's the only way. Margot, bring your things in here. Help her on.
Margot hurries into her room to get her things.
Why, Margot? Why can't I come in here? Because it wouldn't be proper for Margot to sleep with a... Please, Anne, don't argue. Please.
You don't mind sharing your room with Mr. Doosel, do you, Anne?
No. No, of course not.
Good. Anne goes off into her bedroom, helping Margot. Mr. Frank starts to search in the cupboards. Where's the cognac?
It's there, but, Otto, I was saving it in case of illness.
I think we couldn't find a better time to use it. Peter, will you get 5 glasses for me? Peter goes for the glasses. Margot comes out of her bedroom, carrying her possessions, which she hangs behind a curtain in the main room. Mr. Frank finds the cognac and pours it into the 5 glasses that Peter brings him. Mr. Van Daan stands looking on, sourly. Mrs. Van Daan comes downstairs and looks around at all the bustle.
What's happening? What's going on?
Someone's moving in with us.
In here? You're joking. It's only for a night or two, until Mr. Crawler finds him another place.
Yeah. Mr. Frank hurries over as Mr. Crawler and Doosel come up. Doosel is a man in his late 50s, meticulous, finicky, bewildered now. He wears a raincoat. He carries a briefcase, stuffed full, and a small medicine case. Come in, Mr. Doosel. This is Mr. Frank. Mr. Otto Frank? Yes, let me take your things. He takes the hat and briefcase, but Doosel clings to his medicine case. This is my wife, Edith, Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan, their son, Peter, and my daughters, Margot and Anne. Doosel shakes hands with everyone. Thank you, Mr. Frank. Thank you all. Mr. Doosel, I leave you in good hands. Oh, Dirk's coat. Doosel hurriedly takes off the raincoat, giving it to Mr. Crawler. Underneath is his white dentist's jacket, with a yellow Star of David on it. What can I say to thank you?
Mr. Crawler and Meep, they're our lifeline. Without them, we couldn't live.
Please, you make us seem very heroic. It isn't that at all. We simply don't like the Nazis. To Mr. Frank, who offers him a drink. No, thanks. We don't like their methods. We don't like... I know. No one's going to tell us Dutchmen what to do with our damn Jews. Pay no attention to Mr. Frank. I'll be up tomorrow to see that they're treating you right. Don't trouble to come down again. Peter will bolt the door after me, won't you, Peter? Yes, sir. Thank you, Peter. I'll do it. Good night. Good night.
Good night, Mr. Crawler.
We'll see you tomorrow, then. Mr. Crawler goes out with Mr. Frank. Mrs. Frank gives each one of the grown-ups a glass of cognac.
Please, Mr. Doosel, sit down.
Mr. Doosel sinks into a chair. Mrs. Frank gives him a glass of cognac. I'm dreaming, I know it. I can't believe my eyes. Mr. Otto Frank here. You're not in Switzerland, then? A woman told me. She said she'd gone to your house. The door was open, everything was in disorder, dishes in the sink. She said she found a piece of paper in the wastebasket with an address scribbled on it. An address in Zurich. She said you must have escaped to Zurich.
Father put that there purposely, just so people would think that very thing.
And you've been here all the time?
All the time. Ever since July.
Anne speaks to her father as he comes back.
It worked, Pim. The address you left. Mr. Dussel says that people believe we escaped to Switzerland.
I'm glad. And now, let's have a little drink to welcome Mr. Dussel. Before they can drink, Mr. Dussel bolts his drink. Mr. Frank smiles and raises his glass. To Mr. Dussel, welcome. We're very honored to have you with us.
To Mr. Dussel, welcome.
The Van Daans murmur a welcome. The grown-ups drink.
That was good.
Did Mr. Crawler warn you that you won't get much to eat here? You can imagine, 3 ration books among the 7 of us, and now you make 8. Peter walks away, humiliated. Outside, a street organ is heard dimly. Mr. Van Daan, you don't realize what is happening outside, that you should warn me of a thing like that. You don't realize what's going on. As Mr. Van Daan starts his characteristic pacing, Dussel turns to speak to the others. Right here in Amsterdam, every day, hundreds of Jews disappear. They surround a block and search house by house. Children come home from school to find their parents gone. Hundreds are being deported. People that you and I know. The Hallensteins, the Wessels.
Oh, no. No.
They get their call-up notice. Come to the Jewish theater on such and such a day and hour. Bring only what you can carry in a rucksack. And if you refuse the call-up notice, then they come and drag you from your home and ship you off to Mauthausen, the death camp.
We didn't know that things had got so much worse.
Forgive me for speaking so.
Reread the description of Mr. Dussel's welcome to the annex in lines 1752 through 1773. What does bolt mean in this context? Pause while you think. It means to gulp down. What does this word suggest about Mr. Dussel? Seems like he's probably really nervous. Mr. and Mrs. Van Daan murmur their welcome. What are the playwrights indicating by using the word murmur? The Van Daans are not sincere in their welcome. Peter is humiliated by his father's comment to Mr. Dussel. What is the impact of the playwright's use of the word humiliated instead of a word like upset or embarrassed? Humiliated has a stronger sense of shame and disapproval.
Do you know the Duvals? What's become of them? Their daughter Yopi and I are in the same class. Yopi's my best friend.
They are gone.
Gone?
With all the others.
Oh no, not Yopi.
She turns away, in tears. Mrs. Frank motions to Margot to comfort her. Margot goes to Anne, putting her arms comfortingly around her.
There were some people called Wagner. They lived near us?
I think we should put this off until later. We all have many questions we want to ask. But I'm sure that Mr. Dussel would like to get settled before supper. Thank you, I would. I brought very little with me. Giving him his hat and briefcase. I'm sorry we can't give you a room alone, but I hope you won't be too uncomfortable. We've had to make strict rules here, a schedule of hours. We'll tell you after supper. Anne, would you like to take Mr. Dussel to his room?
If you'll come with me, Mr. Dussel.
She starts for her room, shaking hands with each in turn. Forgive me if I haven't really expressed my gratitude to all of you. This has been such a shock to me. I'd always thought of myself as Dutch. I was born in Holland. My father was born in Holland, and my grandfather. And now, after all these years... If you'll excuse me. Dussel gives a little bow and hurries off after Anne. Mr. Frank and the others are subdued.
Well, here we are.
Dussel looks around the room. In the main room, Margot speaks to her mother.
The news sounds pretty bad, doesn't it? It's so different from what Mr. Crawler tells us. Mr. Crawler says things are improving.
I like it better the way Crawler tells it. They resume their occupations, quietly. Peter goes off into his room. In Ann's room, Ann turns to Dussel.
You're going to share the room with me.
I'm a man who's always lived alone. I haven't had to adjust myself to others. I hope you'll bear with me until I learn.
Let me help you.
She takes his briefcase.
Do you always live all alone? Have you no family at all?
No one. He opens his medicine case and spreads his bottles on the dressing table.
How dreadful. You must be terribly lonely.
I'm used to it.
I don't think I could ever get used to it. Didn't you even have a pet? A cat? Or a dog?
I have an allergy for fur-bearing animals. They give me asthma.
Oh, dear. Peter has a cat.
Here? He has it here?
Yes, but we hardly ever see it. He keeps it in his room all the time. I'm sure it will be all right.
Let us hope so. He takes some pills to fortify himself.
That's Margot's bed, where you're going to sleep. I sleep on the sofa there.
Indicating the clothes hooks on the wall.
We cleared these off for your things.
She goes over to the window.
The best part about this room, you can look down and see a bit of the street and the canal. There's a houseboat. You can see the end of it. A bargeman lives there with his family. They have a baby, and he's just beginning to walk. And I'm so afraid he's going to fall into the canal someday. I watch him.
Your father spoke of a schedule.
Oh, yes. It's mostly about the times we have to be quiet, and the times for the WC. You can use it now if you like.
No, thank you.
I suppose you think it's awful, my talking about a thing like that. But you don't know how important it can get to be, especially when you're frightened. About this room, the way Margot and I did, she had it to herself in the afternoons for studying, reading, lessons, you know, and I took the mornings. Would that be all right with you?
I'm not at my best in the morning.
You stay here in the mornings, then. I'll take the room in the afternoons.
Tell me, when you're in here, what happens to me? Where am I spending my time? In there with all the people?
Yes.
I see.
We have supper at 6:30.
Then, if you don't mind, I'd like to lie down quietly for 10 minutes before eating. I find it helps the digestion.
Of course. I hope I'm not going to be too much of a bother to you. I seem to be able to get everyone's back up.
Dussel lies down on the sofa, curled up, his back to her.
Remember that playwrights often reveal what characters are like through their actions and speech, as well as through direct comments in the stage directions. Reread lines 1875 through 1954 to identify clues in the text that reveal what Mr. Dussel is like. What do Mr. Dussel's words and behavior, along with notes in the stage directions, reveal about him? Pause while you think. Dussel is used to being alone. He's allergic to animals with fur. He takes some pills to fortify himself. Dussel is mainly focused on himself. He's not flexible, and he seems worried about having to deal with all the people on a regular basis.
I always get along very well with children. My patients all bring their children to me because they know I get on well with them. So don't you worry about that. Ann leans over him, taking his hand and shaking it gratefully.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Dussel.
The lights dim to darkness. The curtain falls on the scene. Ann's voice comes to us, faintly at first, and then with increasing power.
And yesterday I finished Sissy von Marxwelt's latest book. I think she is a first-class writer. I shall definitely let my children read her. Monday, the 21st of September, 1942. Mr. Dussel and I had another battle yesterday. Yes, Mr. Dussel. According to him, nothing, I repeat, nothing is right about me. My appearance, my character, my manners. While he was going on at me, I thought, sometime I'll give you such a smack that you'll fly right up to the ceiling. Why is it that every grown-up thinks he knows the way to bring up children? Particularly the grown-ups that never had any. I keep wishing that Peter was a girl instead of a boy. Then I would have someone to talk to. Margot's a darling, but she takes everything too seriously. To pause for a moment on the subject of Mrs. Van Daan, I must tell you that her attempts to flirt with Father are getting her nowhere. Pim, thank goodness, won't play.
As she is saying the last lines, the curtain rises on the darkened scene. Anne's voice fades out. Scene 4. It is the middle of the night, several months later. The stage is dark, except for a little light which comes through the skylight in Peter's room. Everyone is in bed. Mr. and Mrs. Frank lie on the couch in the main room, which has been pulled out to serve as a makeshift double bed.
Margot is sleeping on a mattress on the floor in the main room, behind a curtain stretched across for privacy. The others are all in their accustomed rooms.
From outside we hear two drunken soldiers singing Lily Marlene. A girl's high giggle is heard. The sound of running feet is heard coming closer and then fading in the distance. Throughout the scene, there is the distant sound of airplanes passing overhead. A match suddenly flares up in the attic. We dimly see Mr. Van Daan. He is getting his bearings. He comes quickly down the stairs and goes to the cupboard where the food is stored. Again, the match flares up and is as quickly blown out. The dim figure is seen to steal back up the stairs.
Remember that acts in a play are divided into smaller sections called scenes. Explain why the playwrights begin a new scene here. Pause while you think. The time of the action has changed. When does this scene take place? It is the middle of the night, a few months after scene 3.
There is quiet for a second or two, broken only by the sound of airplanes and running feet on the street below. Suddenly, out of the silence and the dark, we hear Anne scream.
No! No! Don't take me!
She moans, tossing and crying in her sleep. The other people wake, terrified. Dussel sits up in bed, furious. Shush, Anne! Anne, for God's sake, shush!
Save me! Save me!
She screams and screams. Dussel gets out of bed, going over to her, trying to wake her. For God's sake, quiet, quiet! You want someone to hear? In the main room, Mrs. Frank grabs a shawl and pulls it around her. She rushes into Anne, taking her in her arms. Mr. Frank hurriedly gets up, putting on his overcoat. Margot sits up, terrified. Peter's light goes on in his room.
Hush, darling, hush. It's all right. It's all right.
Over her shoulder to Dussel.
Will you be kind enough to turn on the light, Mr. Dussel? It's nothing, my darling. It was just a dream.
Dussel turns on the light in the bedroom. Mrs. Frank holds Anne in her arms. Gradually, Anne comes out of her nightmare, still trembling with horror. Mr. Frank comes into the room and goes quickly to the window, looking out to be sure that no one outside had heard Anne's screams. Mrs. Frank holds Anne, talking softly to her. In the main room, Margot stands on a chair, turning on the center hanging lamp. A light goes on in the Van Daan's room overhead. Peter puts his robe on, coming out of his room. Something must be done about that child, Mrs. Frank. Yelling like that. Who knows but there's somebody on the streets. She's endangering all our lives.
Anne, darling.
Every night she twists and turns. I don't sleep. I spend half my night shushing her. And now it's nightmares. Margot comes to the door of Anne's room, followed by Peter. Mr. Frank goes to them, indicating that everything is all right. Peter takes Margot back.
You're here safe, you see? Nothing has happened. Please, Mr. Dussel, go back to bed. She'll be herself in a minute or two. Won't you, Anne?
Picking up a book and a pillow.
Thank you, but I'm going to the WC. The one place where there's peace.
He stalks out. Mr. Van Daan, in underwear and trousers, comes down the stairs.
Playwrights can use dialogue, the written conversation between two or more characters, to make a contrast. Reread lines 2040 through 2066 to contrast the ways Mr. Dussel and Mrs. Frank communicate with Anne. Pause while you think. Mr. Dussel is furious and speaks to her using a harsh tone. Mrs. Frank is gentle and loving. She uses language such as, "my darling." What does this dialogue reveal about the characters? It suggests that Dussel is not any more comfortable with the other residents than he was when he arrived. Anne's nightmare suggests that the tension of being in hiding is having an impact on her.
What is it? What happened? A nightmare. She was having a nightmare. I thought someone was murdering her. Unfortunately, no.
He goes into the bathroom. Mr. Van Daan goes back up the stairs. Mr. Frank, in the main room, sends Peter back to his own bedroom. Thank you, Peter. Go back to bed. Peter goes back to his room. Mr. Frank follows him, turning out the light and looking out the window. Then he goes back to the main room and gets up on a chair, turning out the center hanging lamp.
Would you like some water? Was it a very bad dream? Perhaps if you told me. I'd rather not talk about it. Poor darling. Try to sleep then. I'll sit right here beside you until you fall asleep.
She brings a stool over, sitting there.
You don't have to. But I'd like to stay with you. Very much. Really. I'd rather you didn't. Good night, then.
She leans down to kiss Anne. Anne throws her arm up over her face, turning away. Mrs. Frank, hiding her hurt, kisses Anne's arm.
You'll be all right? There's nothing that you want? Will you please ask Father to come? Of course, Anne dear.
She hurries out into the other room. Mr. Frank comes to her as she comes in.
Zeker langs nacht, dear.
Edith, liebe Schau.
Es macht nicht. Ik danke damle ben Herrgott. Das ist ich, wenigstens an dich wendet, wenn die Trost braucht. Geh hinein, Otto. Sie ist ganz aus der Frangst.
As Mr. Frank hesitates,
Geh zu ihr.
he looks at her for a second and then goes to get a cup of water for Anne. Mrs. Frank sinks down on the bed, her face in her hands, trying to keep from sobbing aloud. Margot comes over to her, putting her arms around her.
She wants nothing of me. She pulled away when I leaned down to kiss her. It's a phase. You heard Father. Most girls go through it. They turn to their fathers at this age. They give all their love to their fathers. You weren't like this. You didn't shut me out. She'll get over it.
She smooths the bed for Mrs. Frank and sits beside her a moment as Mrs. Frank lies down. In Anne's room, Mr. Frank comes in, sitting down by Anne. Anne flings her arms around him, clinging to him.
Although most of the play is written in English, here the playwrights present part of the dialogue in German. Reread lines 2151 through 2168. Why do you think the playwrights have Mr. and Mrs. Frank speak German in this part of the script? Pause while you think. People who speak more than one language may revert to the one they feel most comfortable with in times of stress. Because the play is written in English, the playwrights may be emphasizing that Mr. and Mrs. Frank are under extreme stress.
In the distance, we hear the sound of ack-ack.
Oh, Pim, I dreamed that they came to get us. The green police. They broke down the door and grabbed me and started to track me out the way they did Yopi.
I want you to take this pill.
What is it?
Something to quiet you. She takes it and drinks the water. In the main room, Margot turns out the light and goes back to her bed. Do you want me to read to you for a while?
No. Just sit with me for a minute. Was I awful? Did I yell terribly loud? Do you think anyone outside could have heard?
No. Lie quietly now. Try to sleep.
I'm a terrible coward. I'm so disappointed in myself. I think I've conquered my fear. I think I'm really grown up. And then something happens, and I run to you like a baby. I love you, Father. I don't love anyone but you.
Annala.
It's true. I've been thinking about it for a long time. You're the only one I love.
It's fine to hear you tell me that you love me, but I'd be happier if you said you loved your mother as well. She needs your help so much. Your love.
We have nothing in common. She doesn't understand me. Whenever I try to explain my views on life to her, she asks me if I'm constipated.
You hurt her very much just now. She's crying. She's in there crying.
I can't help it. I only told the truth. I didn't want her here. Oh, Pim, I was horrible, wasn't I? And the worst of it is, I can stand off and look at myself doing it, and know it's cruel, and yet I can't stop doing it. What's the matter with me? Tell me. Don't say it's just a phase. Help me.
There is so little that we parents can do to help our children. We can only try to set a good example, point the way. The rest you must do yourself. You must build your own character.
I'm trying. Really, I am. Every night I think back over all of the things I did that day that were wrong, like putting the wet mop in Mr. Doosel's bed. And this thing now with Mother. I say to myself, that was wrong. I make up my mind. I'm never going to do that again. Never. Of course, I may do something worse, but at least I'll never do that again. I have a nicer side, Father. A sweeter, nicer side. But I'm scared to show it. I'm afraid that people are going to laugh at me if I'm serious. So the mean on comes to the outside, and the good on stays on the inside. And I keep on trying to switch them around, and have the good on outside and the bad on inside, and be what I'd like to be, and might be, if only.
Another way authors reveal what characters are like is through a character's own thoughts. Reread lines 2233 to 2274 to examine Anne's thoughts about herself. What do Anne's thoughts tell the audience about her nature? Pause while you think. Anne is self-aware and knows that sometimes her behavior hurts others. She says, "I was horrible, wasn't I?" She sincerely wishes to be kinder. "I'm never going to do that again, never. Of course, I may do something worse." Her sometimes brash behavior is a way of hiding her inner fear of ridicule. "I'm afraid that people are going to laugh at me if I'm serious."
She is asleep. Mr. Frank watches her for a moment, and then turns off the light and starts out. The lights dim out. The curtain falls on the scene. Anne's voice is heard, dimly at first, and then with growing strength.
The air raids are getting worse. They come over day and night. The noise is terrifying. Pim says it should be music to our ears. The more planes, the sooner will come the end of the war. Mrs. Van Don pretends to be a fatalist. What will be, will be. But when the planes come over, who is the most frightened? No one else but Petronella. Monday, the 9th of November, 1942. Wonderful news. The Allies have landed in Africa. Pim says that we can look for an early finish to the war. Just for fun, he asked each of us what was the first thing we wanted to do when we got out of here. Mrs. Van Don longs to be home with her own things, her needlepoint chairs, the Bechstein piano her father gave her, the best that money could buy. Peter would like to go to a movie. Mr. Dussel wants to get back to his dentist's drill. He's afraid he is losing his touch. For myself, there are so many things. To ride a bike again. To laugh till my belly aches. To have new clothes from the skin out. To have a hot tub filled to overflowing and wallow in it for hours. To be back in school with my friends.
As the last lines are being said, the curtain rises on the scene. The lights dim on as Anne's voice fades away. Scene 5. It is the first night of the Hanukkah celebration. Mr. Frank is standing at the head of the table, on which is the menorah. He lights the shamos, or servant candle, and holds it as he says the blessing. Seated listening is all of the family, dressed in their best. The men wear hats. Peter wears his cap. Praised be thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has sanctified us with thy commandments, and bidden us kindle the Hanukkah lights. Praised be thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, who has wrought wondrous deliverances for our fathers in days of old. Praised be thou, O Lord our God, ruler of the universe, that thou hast given us life and sustenance, and brought us to this happy season.
Mr. Frank lights the one candle of the menorah as he continues.
Notice the stage directions at the beginning of Scene 5. Reread lines 2320 to 2328. Based on these stage directions, what will the focus of Scene 5 be? The celebration of Hanukkah. Who is leading the celebration of Hanukkah? Mr. Frank. Why might the playwrights have chosen to focus on this celebration? Pause while you think. Hanukkah is a sacred holiday for the Jewish people. The celebration reinforces that being Jewish is the reason the families are hiding.
We kindle this Hanukkah light to celebrate the great and wonderful deeds wrought through the zeal with which God filled the hearts of the heroic Maccabees 2,000 years ago. They fought against indifference, against tyranny and oppression, and they restored our temple to us. May these lights remind us that we should ever look to God, whence cometh our help. Amen.
Amen.
Mr. Frank hands Mrs. Frank the prayer book.
I lift up mine eyes unto the mountains, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber. He that keepeth Israel doth neither slumber nor sleep. The Lord is thy keeper. The Lord is thy shade upon thy right hand. The sun shall not smite thee by day, nor the moon by night. The Lord shall keep thee from all evil. He shall keep thy soul. The Lord shall guard thy going out and thy coming in, from this time forth and forevermore. Amen.
Amen. Mrs. Frank puts down the prayer book and goes to get the food and wine. Margot helps her. Mr. Frank takes the men's hats and puts them aside.
That was very moving.
It isn't over yet. Sit down, sit down. There's a lot more. Songs and presents.
Presents?
Not this year, unfortunately. But always on Hanukkah, everyone gives presents. Everyone.
Like our St. Nicholas Day.
No, not like St. Nicholas. What kind of a Jew are you that you don't know Hanukkah? I remember particularly the candles. First one, as we have tonight. Then, the second night you light 2 candles, the next night 3, and so on until you have 8 candles burning. When there are 8 candles, it is truly beautiful. And the
Reread lines 2359 through 2378. Why is most of this text shown within quotation marks? The quotation marks indicate that the words are from another source, a prayer book. What is the impact of the ancient prayer that Mr. Frank reads? What is the impact of the ancient prayer that Mrs. Frank reads? Although the prayer is ancient, its solemn language refers Reread lines 2359 through 2378. Why is most of this text shown within quotation marks? The quotation marks indicate that the words are from another source, a prayer book. What is the impact of the ancient prayer that Mrs. Frank reads? Although the prayer is ancient, its solemn language offers hope for the family's current situation. The Lord shall keep thee from all evil, from this time forth and forevermore.
Oh, don't talk about them.
I make the best latkes you ever tasted. Invite us all next year, in your own home.
God willing.
God willing. What I remember best is the presents we used to get when we were little. 8 days of presents, and each day they got better and better. We are all here alive. That is present enough. No, it isn't. I've got something.
She rushes into her room, hurriedly puts on a little hat improvised from the lampshade, grabs a satchel bulging with parcels, and comes running back.
What is it? Presents! Presents?
Look! What she got on her head? A lampshade. She picks one out at random.
This is for Margot.
She hands it to Margot, pulling her to her feet.
Read it out loud. You have never lost your temper. You never will, I fear. You are so good, but if you should, put all your crosswords here.
She tears open the package.
A new crossword puzzle book. Where did you get it? It isn't new. It's one that you've done. But I rubbed it all out. And if you wait a little and forget, you can do it all over again. It's wonderful, Anne. Thank you. You'd never know it wasn't new.
From outside, we hear the sound of a streetcar passing.
Mrs. Von Don? This is awful. I haven't anything for anyone. I never thought.
This is all Anne's idea. Holding up a bottle.
What is it? It's hair shampoo. I took all the odds and ends of soap and mixed them with the last of my toilet water. Oh, Annika. I wanted to write a poem for all of them, but I didn't have time.
Offering a large box to Mr. Von Don.
Yours, Mr. Von Don, is really something. Something you want more than anything. Look! Cigarettes!
Cigarettes!
2 of them. Pim found some old pipe tobacco in the pocket lining of his coat, and we made them. Or rather, Pim did. Let me see. Well, look at that. Light it, Pooty, light it.
Mr. Von Don hesitates.
It's tobacco. Really it is. There's a little fluff in it, but not much.
Everyone watches intently as Mr. Von Don cautiously lights it. The cigarette flares up. Everyone laughs. It works.
Look at him.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you. Anne rushes back to her satchel for another present, handing her mother a piece of paper.
For Mother, Hanukkah greeting.
She pulls her mother to her feet.
Here's an IOU that I promise to pay. 10 hours of doing whatever you say. Signed Anne Frank.
Mrs. Frank, touched, takes Anne in her arms, holding her close.
10 hours of doing what you're told? Anything you're told?
That's right.
You wouldn't want to sell that, Mrs. Frank.
Never. This is the most precious gift I've ever had.
She sits, showing her present to the others. Anne hurries back to the satchel and pulls out a scarf, the scarf that Mr. Frank found in the first scene.
For Pim.
Annika, I wasn't supposed to have a present. He takes it, unfolding it, and showing it to the others.
It's a muffler, to put round your neck, like an ascot, you know. I made it myself out of odds and ends. I knitted it in the dark each night, after I'd gone to bed. I'm afraid it looks better in the dark.
It's fine. It fits me perfectly. Thank you, Annela. Anne hands Peter a ball of paper with a string attached to it.
That's for Mushi.
On behalf of Mushi, I thank you.
And this is yours, from Mrs. Quack Quack. Well, open it. Aren't you going to open it?
Stage directions can provide important information that links scenes in a play. Reread lines 2532 through 2551 to determine how the action in this scene is connected to scene 1. The scarf that Anne makes for her father as a Hanukkah gift is the same scarf that Mr. Frank puts around his neck in scene 1. Why is this detail in the stage directions important to know? It explains why the scarf is still important to Mr. Frank after the war and why he saves it when he comes back to the annex.
I'm scared too. I know something's going to jump out and hit me.
No, it's nothing like that, really. What is it, Peter? Go on, show it. It's a safety razor.
A what?
A razor. You didn't make that out of odds and ends. Meep got it for me. It's not new, it's second-hand. But you really do need a razor now.
For what?
Look on his upper lip. You can see the beginning of a mustache.
He wants to get rid of that? Put a little milk on it and let the cat lick it off. Oh, think you're funny, don't you? Look, he can't wait. He's going in to try it. I'm going to give Mushi his present.
He goes into his room, slamming the door behind him.
Mushi, Mushi, Mushi.
In the distance we hear a dog persistently barking. Anne brings a gift to Dussel.
And last, but never least, my roommate, Mr. Dussel.
For me? You have something for me?
He opens the small box she gives him.
I made them myself.
Capsules. 2 capsules.
They're earplugs.
Earplugs?
To put in your ears so you won't hear me when I thrash around at night. I saw them advertised in a magazine. They're not real ones. I made them out of cotton and candle wax. Try them. See if they don't work. See if you can hear me talk.
Putting them in his ears.
Wait now until I get them in. So.
Are you ready?
Huh?
Are you ready?
Good God! They've gone inside! I can't get them out!
They laugh as Mr. Dussel jumps about, trying to shake the plugs out of his ears. Finally, he gets them out. Putting them away.
Thank you, Anne. Thank you.
A real Hanukkah.
Wasn't it cute of her? I don't know when she did it. I love my present. And now, let's have the song, Father. Please. Have you heard the Hanukkah song, Mr. Dussel? The song is the whole thing. Oh Hanukkah, the sweet celebration.
I'm afraid, Anne, we shouldn't sing that song tonight. It's a song of jubilation, of rejoicing. One is apt to become too enthusiastic.
Oh, please, please. Let's sing the song. I promise not to shout.
Very well, but quietly now. I'll keep an eye on you, and when... As Anne starts to sing, she is interrupted by Dussel, who is snorting and wheezing. Pointing to Peter.
You...
Peter is coming from his bedroom, ostentatiously holding a bulge in his coat, as if he were holding his cat, and dangling Ann's present before it.
How many times I told you, out, out!
Going to Peter.
What's the matter with you? Haven't you any sense? Get that cat out of here!
Cat?
You heard me. Get it out of here.
I have no cat. Delighted with his joke, he opens his coat and pulls out a bath towel. The group at the table laugh, enjoying the joke.
It doesn't need to be the cat. His clothes are enough. When he comes out of that room...
Don't worry. You won't be bothered any more. We're getting rid of it.
Oh, at last you listen to me.
He goes off into his bedroom.
I'm not doing it for you. That's all in your mind. All of it.
He starts back to his place at the table.
I'm doing it because I'm sick of seeing that cat eat all our food.
That's not true. I only give him bones, scraps.
Don't tell me. He gets fatter every day. Damn cat looks better than any of us. Out he goes tonight.
No, no.
Mr. Von Don, you can't do that. That's Peter's cat. Anne.
If he goes, I go.
Go, go.
You're not going and the cat's not going. Now please, this is Hanukkah. Hanukkah! This is the time to celebrate. What's the matter with all of you? Come on, Anne, let's have the song. Oh Hanukkah, the sweet celebration.
I think we should first blow out the candle. Then we'll have something for tomorrow night.
But, Father, you're supposed to let it burn itself out.
I'm sure that God understands shortages. Praised be thou, O Lord our God, who hast sustained us and permitted us to celebrate this joyous festival. He is about to blow out the candle, when suddenly there is a crash of something falling below. They all freeze in horror, motionless. For a few seconds there is complete silence. Mr. Frank slips off his shoes. The others noiselessly follow his example. Mr. Frank turns out a light near him. He motions to Peter to turn off the center lamp. Peter tries to reach it, realizes he cannot, and gets up on a chair. Just as he is touching the lamp, he loses his balance. The chair goes out from under him. He falls. The iron lampshade crashes to the floor. There was a sound of feet below, running down the stairs.
God Almighty!
The only light left comes from the Hanukkah candle.
Reread lines 2668 through 2699. Draw conclusions about Mr. Von Don. What can you infer about Mr. Von Don from the words he speaks to Peter and to Mr. Dussel? Pause while you think. Mr. Von Don is very direct, and he isn't afraid to say just what he thinks. His thoughts can be based more on emotion than on facts and logic. Don't tell me, he gets fatter every day. Damn cat looks better than any of us. His threat to get rid of Peter's cat and to allow Peter himself to leave shows that he's not an understanding or supportive parent. The series of events in a story or play is called the plot. Stage directions in a play may describe a key event in the plot. Reread lines 2720 through 2736 to identify the crucial event that happens. Pause while you think. Although no one should be downstairs, the residents of the annex hear a crash of something falling below. After Peter and the lampshade fall, making a loud noise upstairs, the residents hear the sound of running feet below. Why is this event such an important part of the plot? The residents of the annex fear that their hiding place has been discovered.
Dussel comes from his room. Mr. Frank creeps over to the stairwell and stands listening. The dog is heard barking excitedly.
Do you hear anything?
No, I think they've gone.
It's the Green Police. They found us.
If they had, they wouldn't have left. They'd be up here by now.
I know it's the Green Police. They've gone to get help, that's all. They'll be back.
Or it may have been the Gestapo looking for papers. Or a thief looking for money.
We've got to do something. Quick, quick, before they come back.
There isn't anything to do. Just wait. Mr. Frank holds up his hand for them to be quiet. He is listening intently. There is complete silence, as they all strain to hear any sound from below. Suddenly, Anne begins to sway. With a low cry, she falls to the floor in a faint. Mrs. Frank goes to her quickly, sitting beside her on the floor, and taking her in her arms.
Get some water, please. Get some water.
Margot starts for the sink. No, no! No one's going to run water! If they found us, they found us. Get the water. Margot starts again for the sink. Mr. Frank, getting a flashlight. I'm going down. Margot rushes to him, clinging to him. Anne struggles to consciousness.
No, Father, no. There may be someone there, waiting. It may be a trap.
This is Saturday. There is no way for us to know what has happened until Meep or Mr. Crawler comes on Monday morning. We cannot live with this uncertainty.
Don't go, Father. Hush, darling, hush.
Mr. Frank slips quietly out, down the steps, and out through the door below.
Margot, stay close to me.
Margot goes to her mother. Shush! Shush! Mrs. Frank whispers to Margot to get the water. Margot goes for it.
Pooty, where's our money? Get our money. I hear you can buy the Green Police off. So much ahead. Go upstairs, quick. Get the money.
Keep still.
Do you want to be dragged off to a concentration camp? Are you going to stand there and wait for them to come up and get you? Do something, I tell you.
Will you keep still? He goes over to the stairwell to listen. Peter goes to his mother, helping her up onto the sofa. There is a second of silence. Then Anne can stand it no longer.
Someone go after Father. Make Father come back.
I'll go. Haven't you done enough? He pushes Peter roughly away. In his anger against his father, Peter grabs a chair as if to hit him with it, then puts it down, burying his face in his hands. Mrs. Frank begins to pray softly.
Please, please, Mr. Van Daan, get Father.
Quiet, quiet! Anne is shocked into silence. Mrs. Frank pulls her closer, holding her protectively in her arms.
I lift up mine eyes unto the mountains, from whence cometh my help. My help cometh from the Lord, who made heaven and earth. He will not suffer thy foot to be moved. He that keepeth thee will not slumber.
She stops as she hears someone coming. They all watch the door tensely. Mr. Frank comes quietly in. Anne rushes to him, holding him tight. It was a thief. That noise must have scared him away.
Thank God.
He took the cash box and the radio. He ran away in such a hurry that he didn't stop to shut the street door. It was swinging wide open. I think it would be good to have some light.
Are you sure it's all right?
The danger has passed. Margot goes to light the small lamp. Don't be so terrified, Anne. We're safe.
Who says the danger has passed? Don't you realize we're in greater danger than ever?
Mr. Dussel,
will you be still?
Mr. Frank takes Anne back to the table, making her sit down with him, trying to calm her.
Pointing to Peter.
Thanks to this clumsy fool, there's someone now who knows we're up here. Someone now knows we're up here, hiding.
Someone knows we're here, yes. But who is the someone? A thief! A thief! You think a thief is going to go to the Green Police and say, I was robbing a place the other night, and I heard a noise up over my head. You think a thief is going to do that?
Yes, I think he will.
You're crazy!
She stumbles back to her seat at the table. Peter follows protectively, pushing Dussel aside.
I think someday he'll be caught, and then he'll make a bargain with the Green Police. If they'll let him off, he'll tell them where some Jews are hiding.
He goes off into the bedroom. There is a second of appalled silence. He's right.
Father, let's get out of here. We can't stay here now. Let's go.
Go where?
Yes, where?
Have we lost all faith, all courage? A moment ago, we thought that they'd come for us. We were sure it was the end. But it wasn't the end. We're alive. Safe. We thank Thee, O Lord our God, that in Thy infinite mercy Thou hast again seen fit to spare us. He blows out the candle, then turns to Anne. Come on, Anne, the song. Let's have the song. He starts to sing. Anne finally starts falteringly to sing, as Mr. Frank urges her on. Her voice is hardly audible at first.
Oh Hanukkah, the sweet celebration. Around the feast we gather in complete jubilation. Happiest of seasons now is here. Many are the reasons for good cheer. Together we'll weather whatever tomorrow may bring. So hear us rejoicing and merrily voicing the Hanukkah song that we sing. Hoy! Hear us rejoicing and merrily voicing the Hanukkah song that we sing.
The curtain falls.
One way playwrights reveal what a character is like is through the character's words. Reread lines 2906 to 2922 to discover more about Mr. Frank. What can you infer about Mr. Frank from what he says to all the residents of the annex? Pause while you think. Mr. Frank is strong and instills hope and courage. We're alive, safe. He's a calming influence. He has faith in God. We thank Thee, O Lord our God, that in Thy infinite mercy Thou hast seen again fit to spare us. Why does Mr. Frank want the family to sing the Hanukkah song? To build their courage? The history behind Hanukkah includes the victory of the Jewish people over invaders and the rededication of the temple in Jerusalem in 165 BCE. An analogy is a comparison between two things that are alike in some way. Reread lines 2923 to 2952. What analogy are the playwrights making, and what is the impact? Pause while you think. Like the ancient Jews, the Jews in the annex are oppressed. They hope to be successful in their struggle as the ancient Jews were. Which words in the song bring out the idea of victory through unity? Together we'll weather whatever tomorrow may bring.